neither, any Democratic Party or any Republican Party, ever tried to attract black voters. And so that led me to doing the senior thesis on the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and that ended up when I was in graduate school, ended up as my first book, Protest at Selma.
Okay, so since you obviously are very interested in the civil rights movement, what would your broad definition of the civil rights movement be? If someone walked up to you and said, I don't know anything about the civil rights movement, what would you tell them?
I, for 20, 25 years, have always preferred the phrase that really Clay Carson of Stanford has tried to emphasize more than civil rights movement, which is black freedom struggle. Because if you say black freedom struggle, it's, I think, in most ways more inclusive than saying civil rights movement. But if we use civil rights movement, that, I think, almost by definition goes all the way back to, literally the 1860s, and the legislation that flowed from the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. So, unless one, another phrase I sometimes use is if you say, Southern Freedom Movement, but the key tension is always whether any one of those names is being used narrowly with reference to sort of the 1954 to 1968 time period, or whether it's being used, much more inclusively across time.
Okay. And so now I'm going to kind of talk more about Ralph Abernathy.
Sure.
So how would you describe him as a leader?
When the Montgomery boycott starts at the end of 1955, Ralph is a much more established ministerial figure in Montgomery than Dr. King is. He's got a bigger church, First Baptist. He's been there longer. He sort of knows the black community better. And King is chosen as the lead spokesperson for the boycott in very large part because King is new to town, and nobody feels any rivalry towards King. Now, Ralph, in the course of 1956, Ralph very much becomes King's closest friend among the folks who are leading the boycott. And Ralph at that time is very happy, to play second fiddle.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, so you talking about the Montgomery bus boycott, so could you just explain a little bit about what that was and then more of Abernathy's role in it?
The boycott, for the 12-plus months that it goes, is amazingly successful in the breadth of support that it attracts from all across Black Montgomery. The public face of the leadership during the boycott is primarily, or really almost entirely, black ministers, because the ministers were not economically vulnerable to to retaliation from local whites. The actual instigation of the boycott was largely the doing of several black women who were professors at Alabama State College. But anyone who was on a public payroll was vulnerable to economic retaliation. The ministers, like King and Abernathy, since they're employed by black churches, they don't have to worry about getting fired like the teachers do. And so that's why, King and Abernathy and, a good many others, become the public voices of the boycott. And then Ralph, too, along with King, they are the two of the Montgomery ministers who take the lead role in creating SCLC in early 1957. And so Ralph and King are really a duo there, from Montgomery in creating SCLC.
Okay, and so then I know you just mentioned the SCLC, so can you talk more about Abernathy's role in the SCLC and his role in creating it?
The real idea of SCLC and the sort of game plan for it actually was written by Bayard Rustin, who was a longtime nonviolent activist from New York. But Abernathy, right from the start, is SCLC's treasurer, and from 1957 all the way through to 1968, within SCLC, Abernathy is always Dr. King's number two. There's never any question that is the sort of closest, tightest bond.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then so talking more about Abernathy's relationship with King, first of all, could you kind of just go through it, and then second of all, why do you think that King was more the number one and Abernathy was the number two?
Sure. When King moves to Atlanta, end of 1959, beginning of 1960, he moves because he feels that his civil rights role has become so demanding, so inescapable, that he's not doing a good job of pastoring his Montgomery church. And being in Atlanta, he'll be able to be at the family church, Ebenezer, and so he can be sort of a half-time pastor along with his dad, and ergo put more time into SCLC. As soon as King makes that decision and that move, he very actively wants to have Ralph also move from Montgomery to Atlanta, and plays a big role in getting another Atlanta church, West Hunter Street Baptist Church, to recruit Ralph. And so by whenever that is, I'd have to look in my own book to know the exact date, but it's sometime like 61. So Ralph rejoins King there. And Ralph was a very good speaker, very good preacher, different style than Doc, more, earthy, down home, would be the sort of label. But Ralph is always very happy as, King's number two. Once King becomes really nationally and internationally famous by like 1964, a tension emerges because Ralph's wife, Juanita wants her husband and herself to be treated as equals to the kings, and that becomes a sort of occasional problem for King.
Okay. Okay, so kind of going back to the civil rights movement, what was Abernathy's role in it? Like, I know you said he was like Martin Luther King's like best friend, you know, they worked together, but like what exactly did he do?
Well, Ralph, all throughout those years, Ralph is still a full-time pastor at his church. And so it's not as if he's putting even 50% of his time into civil rights work. Now, when King and SCLC go to Albany, Georgia in 61, 62, when they go to Birmingham in 63, Ralph is always present in those protest campaigns alongside Doc. And Dr. King, whenever Dr. King knew that he was going to jail, he always wanted Ralph with him in jail. And that's true in Albany, it's true in Birmingham, very, very clear. King wants Abernathy's companionship. Now, Ralph only really becomes a publicly well-known person after Dr. King is assassinated. And everybody around King, it was, super clear that King, without question, wanted Abernathy to be his successor, when something happened. And King always believed, without question, that at some point he was going to be killed. But that's where the story sort of turns sad, because, Abernathy was not as educated or sophisticated a person as Dr. King, and he very suddenly is thrown into the role, in 1968, of being expected to take Dr. King's place, and it's an expectation that is, really doomed to failure.
Okay. And I know you said that it was